Good day, everybody. My name is Dennis Collier, and today we've got just a super fascinating conversation for you. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. T.A. Loeffler, who works at my alma mater, actually. She works at Memorial University of Newfoundland, and T.A. and I are going to discuss the topic of mountain climbing. Now, TA has climbed many mountains, but the main focus of what she and I are going to talk about today is her three different attempts of climbing the world's highest mountain, which everyone knows, of course, to be Mount Everest. Dr. T A Loeffler has 35 years of expertise leading people through significant life-changing experiences. TA's adventures have taken her to 52 different countries and all 7 continents. She has completed 6 4/5 of the 7 summits, which is climbing to the highest peak on all 7 continents. In 2020, TA was named to the 90 greatest Canadian explorers list by Canadian Geographic. As a professor of outdoor recreation at Memorial University of Newfoundland, TA has developed a reputation for excellence in experiential education because her students are more likely to be outside chasing icebergs than sitting in a classroom. T.A. Loeffler, please tell us where you were born and raised.
I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and raised there until I left around age 18.
Now, TA, my next question that I ask every person I interview is the same. Why fill in the blank with his or her sport? And I'm very cognizant of the fact that your sport, it's a pre-made philosophical inquiry, TA. So I don't want to put too much pressure on you to come up with an answer. I think it was George Mallory who said, "Why climb a mountain? Because it's there." So you can't say that, TA. But I am going to ask you the same question that I ask everybody, and I'll leave it to you to come up with an answer as best you see fit. So the question is, TA, why mountain climbing?
I think mountain climbing because I have an innate urge to go to the tops of things. When I was 1, my dad took me on the top of the garage. When I was 4, I started climbing trees. I climbed the garage, I climbed ladders, I climbed ropes in the gymnasium. And I think my parents were actually quite relieved when in high school with an outdoor pursuits club that was on offer there, I finally had uh, a route to my passion, which was to climb mountains. And so I started in high school, climbed my first mountain in grade 10, and have been basically climbing rocks, trees, cliffs, and mountains since then.
So TA, you and I here, we could take this interview in any kind of number of directions. You've done an amazing amount of things in your life in terms of outdoor adventuring. We don't have time to go through it all. So the focus of this particular interview, we are going to focus on not just mountain climbing, but the mountain climbing. We're going to talk about your 3 attempts to summit Mount Everest, the most famous, or should I say infamous, of all the world's peaks. Maybe, TA, you could give us some of the background as to why. It's one thing to climb a mountain, but I guess maybe a little bit more in some insight, TA, as to why you would choose to climb the world's tallest peak, namely Mount Everest.
But we have to set a little bit of a scene here. So, as I said, I had an outdoor pursuits club in high school, which provided early training in climbing skills and in mountain and the culture of mountaineering. And during that same time, Laurie Skreslet became the first Canadian man to summit Mount Everest in 1982. And Sharon Wood became the first Canadian woman to summit Everest just after, not long after I graduated from high school in 1986. And at that point, climbing really evolved around national identity and making the sort of Canadian team or being invited to the Canadian team. So it, much like probably any other athletes imagining a path to a national team, that path seemed very long, very incredibly hard to crack, those kinds of things. And so at that point, I did have an idea that I might want to climb Everest, but kind of put it away. That said, fast forward 2 decades, and in the midst of a midlife crisis, Took a lot of my outdoor activity skills to the peak called Denali, recently politically
Uh,
renamed, back named to McKinley, so some people recognize it by that name. Its indigenous name is Denali, and I spent 26 days with 13 others climbing that peak from the north side, which is a much less used route to the summit. And it was there that I had this sense that I wanted to keep climbing big, tall, high altitude peaks. And it's one of the seven summits, which is a climbing objective that some folks have, trying to reach the highest point on each continent. So with Denali in my sights, I actually headed off back to Nepal, where I had done some trekking in the past and had seen Everest a few years before that, and made the decision that I would actually try to bicycle from Lhasa, Tibet, back to Kathmandu. And it was pretty interesting because when you're trekking or hiking or climbing at altitude, when the altitude impacts your ability to move at speed, you just slow down. You take slower steps. You find a rhythm for breathing and stepping and breathing and stepping. But bicycling at altitude was a very different kind of experience because you can only ride a bicycle so slow. So humbling at times, pushing a bicycle at times, 8 mountain passes all over 5,000 meters above sea level. And we made it to the turnoff to go to Mount Everest Base Camp on the north side. And we had to ride many, 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 many switchbacks, similar to our metabolic and cardiorespiratory engines. Gasoline engines face similar challenges at altitude. So lots of hairpin turns, and then we crossed this pass, and suddenly the whole massif of Everest from the north, and it's the tallest freestanding mountain face you can perceive in the world. And I just there knew that I wanted to try to climb Mount Everest, though I knew I needed to kind of set a path towards making sure I had the proper technical skills and enough knowledge to be uh, safe on the mountain, or as safe as you can be. So remember, I took a picture of myself with the Newfoundland and Labrador flag to remind myself that I had seen this big goal. Returned back to St. John's after that trip and started saying, okay, what's my path back to Everest? How can I fundraise the money to be able to go? What kind of training do I need to do? And actually made the decision that I needed to climb some other peaks first.
so the other peaks, I'm trying to put this in chronological order. This seven summits is a wild idea, TA. Denali is one of them. Had you climbed any of the other six peaks before Denali?
No, and it generally Denali wouldn't be the one if someone was setting out as a relative newcomer to climbing and mountaineering. You wouldn't start with Denali, but because I had so much of this other background, I started there.
It might be useful to put in context these altitudes we're talking about. Denali, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking an altitude of 6,000 plus meters, 6,000. Everest is
8,848.
so uh, well beyond that. So we're talking about some altitudes that the mere mortal can't even begin to comprehend, quite frankly. Denali was your first of the seven at that height. Um, but that was the trigger. That was what kind of gave you the impetus to say, if I did that successfully, um, the next biggest one's Everest, and that's going to be on my bucket list. That was the sequence of events.
Yeah, coming back from all of the learning and the heavy physicality of Denali, and having had this sort of small kind of inkling in high school climbing in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, it started to coalesce. It coalesced in actual moment when I saw Everest from the north side on that bicycling trip. But I
Wild
but
stuff.
I realized at that point that I still wanted to put more training into the bank. Like I think of training as putting deposits in the bank. And then you deposit skill, you deposit cardiorespiratory fitness, you put in your strength training, you put in your cognitive and mental training, although to your spiritual training, put that all in the bank. Because yes, climbing at altitude is incredibly humbling. And so you need to withdraw from your bank as you climb something. So I knew that uh, you know, I teach outdoor education. I've managed risk to taking students out my entire career. I had no interest in dying on a mountain if I could help it. I mean, there are sort of the things you can always anticipate, but, random seracs may fall, but you can ideally not be where they're going to hit or things like that. But then there are people that make decisions on mountains that increase their more likelihood. They're climbing beyond their skill. They're climbing when other people have turned it around. They're climbing with symptoms of high altitude illness, things like that, that they let themselves be too summit driven. So I just wanted some more practice or skill or time on task before absolutely committing to the mountain. So after Denali, I made the call to go and climb Mount Elbrus, which is the highest peak in Europe. Uh, Most people think of the highest peak in Europe as Mont Blanc, but in terms of how the continents get defined, it's a double-headed volcano in Russia, actually. And so went and climbed there in 2006, and weather got in the way of our summit, so we didn't summit. But there I met a longtime Everest climber and guide, Phil Urschler, who I could say, could you give me an evaluation of my skills? Do you think could I, from what you've seen of me on this mountain, is Everest a path that might make sense?
Let me hit on something you mentioned there, TA, about this is going to be the one and only time. I want to keep this as, as positive as possible. But whenever someone mentions Everest, we know people ultimately succumb to the elements while trying it. And I want to read, this is from your book, by the way. TA has a book, folks, which I recommend everyone. You can see that? I recommend everyone get it. Just the last thing we'll say about mountain climbing and particularly Everest, and I'd like TA to get some more of your psychology, okay? Going back to my question, why mountain climbing, particularly Mount Everest? This is from page 28, sorry, 128 out of your book, and this was the day, TA, I'm sorry to say, that a Sherpa got killed during your first trek up the mountain. Quote, considering the dangers of this mountain, I had known it was not a question of if someone would die, but when. So considering, I mean, it is quite a, what can we say? You risk the ultimate price by doing it. I'd love to hear more of the psychology in your or anyone else's brain that goes into taking on a challenge like this when you know this is the kind of thing that might, or in this case, inevitably will happen while you're attempting, and just hopefully it's not you that's the one that has the fate befall them.
So for me, I recognize that climbing Mount Everest or attempting to climb Mount Everest would be life changing. It would require me to be the best possible TA I could be. It would ask me to learn new skills and to push myself harder than I had. And I also, um, at the same time as I started this kind of climbing journey, I also started learning much more about Buddhism. And we had a Buddhist community here. And one of the core teachings of the kind of lineage of Buddhism I was studying was about our awareness of our own mortality and our own death. And one of the teachings is death comes suddenly without warning. And essentially, the focus on that meditation or that teaching is we have this one precious human birth. When in that belief system, it's not guaranteed that you'll be given a human birth. So when you get one, it's like winning the lottery. So one could say, well, then why would you ever risk it? But I'm aware every single day that my life will end. I always hope, ideally, that it will be a long time from now. I'm enjoying my existence. So I do both things that will push me and know that I could be killed tomorrow driving my car. I recognize each and every time I get into my vehicle, it's one of the most dangerous things that I do. I often ask my students when we start an outdoor course and they know that we're going to climb rocks and we're going to paddle in the water and we're going to use camping stoves. I'm like, what's the most dangerous thing we're going to do in this course? And they're like, oh, this and this and this. And I'm like, no, actually, you driving yourself to this course is the most dangerous thing. And the second most thing
True
you're going
enough.
to do is
True enough.
cook your food, because the numbers and the statistics around the frequency of accidents are the highlighted areas. So indeed, climbing at altitude brings its own risks. Mountaineering in a time of climate crisis brings different or more rapidly changing environments that carry risk. Um, Geopolitical difficulties can bring different kinds of risks in terms of the kind of responses, or the ability to be rescued on a mountain. The choice for me of climbing from the south side versus the Tibetan side was around the route and the kinds of challenges and where the challenges come in relation to the altitude on the mountain. But it was also about, you can be rescued to some degree on the south side, in which you can't be on the north side. So there's these complex rubrics that we have in terms of managing risk. If you ever, I had a motorcycle for a while, and
Very
I'd
risky,
heard about.
TA.
I know. So I heard about the hurt report. It was named not because there was lots of documented physical hurt in this report, but that was the person's name. But this person studied all the accidents for a 15 or 10-year period in Southern California, and concluded that 85% of the accidents were caused by other car drivers, and 15% were caused by user error on the side of the motorcyclist. So I instantly made sure that I
85
looked,
to 15.
yeah.
That's a very
So,
one-sided ratio, eh?
and at the time I was riding in my dad's leather jacket, which I liked because it was his. But I instantly went out and bought Blaze neon yellow riding jacket. I had Blaze orange riding pants, and I had a Blaze orange helmet. And what was amazing is I could see, by looking like a transformer bug on my motorcycle, people noticed, people could see me. And
Wow.
that was one action I could take to make motorcycling safer for myself. So that's a part of my psychology is, yes, I'm willing to do riskier activities. I whitewater canoe in very remote rivers that have cold water, but I choose companions that likely can fish me out. I practice the skills. So for choosing Everest, I knew I needed to have a personal skill bank. I knew I chose my outfitting company carefully, so they had good resources and good leadership, so that I would be supported by good decision making, quality food, quality equipment, those kinds of pieces. So yes, can I absolutely guarantee I'm going to come home from a mountain safely? No. Do I guarantee that I can come safely home from driving on the highway? No. So it's balancing both of those things that we all do risky things every day, but people don't often think of them as risky because they're so common.
I think a lot of, as I knew there would be, a lot of wisdom for life in general encapsulated there, TA, within the context of mountain climbing. So let's shift gears forward here just a little bit. And here's how I see the next two parts of our conversation here on Unraveling TA. We're only going to talk about two broad areas. One, let's talk about getting ready for Everest, okay? So we'll talk about what you did in terms of training, and maybe a little bit about some nutrition that might have went into the acute, we'll call it, period, getting ready to tackle Everest. And the last thing we'll talk about, because I'm sure people would love to hear some of your stories, what goes on once you're up there, TA. So that'll be the format, just two parts, getting ready, and then some stories about while you're up on the mountain, and then that'll be the structure of the day. Sound okay?
Sounds great.
All right, so let's talk about the training, the preparatory period getting ready. And I can't help but just one last time before we reflect back, because a lot of the stuff you mentioned made me think, TA, it's not entirely an acute process of you getting ready to go up Everest. But you said you had like 25 years of mountaineering experience before you decided or undertook a program specifically for Everest. So talk about maybe TA how important that entire background was before we get into the specifics of what you did, like say the 18 months prior to Everest.
So I think having a long history or background in outdoor activity gave me, I would call it kind of like the surrounding skills. So when we climbed Denali, imagine four people in the sleeping for 26 days in the space of a dinner table and having to sleep head to toe in the room in the tent because there's not enough room in the tent to sleep four across shoulder to shoulder. It just and that you are eating, cooking, moving, everything in these very small, intense group living experiences. You probably don't want to launch forth into that without at least practicing.
Mm.
Can I take care of myself in the outdoor environment
Outdoor
first?
skills in general.
Outdoor skills in general I think are key, and you hear people who get this bug to go and climb Everest, and in this commercial age it's possible if you've got the money and you do some training you can get yourself on the mountain, but can you care for yourself on the mountain if the folks you've hired to assist you aren't available, either through
Mm.
their own injury, through avalanche? So my thought was, it's good to, or is I still is, do you have the kind of surrounding skills to keep yourself comfortable? When I was climbing in Antarctica to climb Mount Vincent, which is the one of the seven summits, the highest peak in Antarctica, I climbed with Dave Hahn, and he at that point, and maybe still is, the Westerner with the most number of Everest summits. Our summit, and I chose him because it cost about $75,000 to go and climb that peak, because of the mostly because of the cause. It was the most expensive flight I ever took to the continent.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
So I wanted it to go as well as it could. So he it was minus 38 on our summit day, and I was paired with two other climbers, and he the other two weren't nearly as experienced at taking care of themselves in those kinds of temperatures. And he at that point he kind of had them practice a lot of skills that they didn't necessarily have, and he believed that the ability to zip up your jacket was a life-saving skill,
Wow.
uh, because in those kinds of environments, if you do start to get down on the kind of the hyperthermic scale, then you can you start losing fine motor control, and if your jacket's flapping in the wind you're going to lose
Wow.
heat faster. And
Mm.
so there were times when either of them were fumbling with just being able to do their coats up. Long story short, we all got up, we all got down, and it was only later that he said to me that had we not gotten up, he was going to send them back, and he was going to make sure I got up, which I appreciated knowing in hindsight, because I was starting to get a little worried, because occasionally you don't get the summit because someone on your team either becomes ill or isn't skilled enough, and you have to turn around and take them down. So in this case, there was some question about that. So anyway, so we got up to the top. So sometimes even doing your jacket is a life skill. So
Is
that's that set of skills, that you can be comfortable outdoors in a storm, in the cold, in the wind, that you know how to eat and you know how to drink on the fly, you know how to organize your backpack so your snacks are handy, that your water doesn't freeze, that you can keep your hands warm, where you do all of those things. People don't, people think about climbing as ice axes and crampons and the technical skills, but there's this whole set of wraparound skills that can also make your climb.
is he the guy, by the way, TA, who said the summit is optional, getting down is mandatory?
No,
Is that
that's what's
that's
his
not
name?
him?
That was Ed Viesters,
Oh, okay, okay.
another very celebrated climber.
That was a good one, I thought. Let me. You said something else. I'm deviating somewhat, but it's interesting, and it was interesting. Again, reading your book, I learned a lot about the whole process of mountaineering. Tia, I did not realize what a team effort it was. And like you mentioned how, like, I'm familiar with hockey. Like in hockey, you have a team, and some people might be worse than others, and certain players carry more of the load than others because they're better hockey players. But that applies in mountaineering too. And And you actually mentioned TA, another aspect of the team environment that I just think of in contrasting your experience again on Denali with on Everest, and you can elaborate on this, but because you can correct me if I'm wrong, in Denali, it was a team effort in such a way that if you quit, for lack of a better term, the whole team had to come back down. But that was not the case on at least your first attempt on Everest. Like in that situation, you could call it quits at any point in time, and it didn't affect anybody else. And that affected your decision making a little bit because if you know the whole team is counting on me, I might not. I'll be less inclined to say I'm gonna give up because everybody else has to give up. Is that what happened in Denali?
So yeah, because especially since we were climbing on the north side, and we were the only team on the north side, and the north side, like on the south side at 14,000 feet, whatever that is in meters at the moment, um, there's a medical base camp. There's doctors. There's national park staff, and then the runway for the snow ski equipped planes is at 7,000 feet below that. So if you wanted to separate on Denali, your team could just drop you off at 14,000 feet, and there's likely people you could go down the rest of the way down the mountain. Whereas on the other side, because we were so remote, there would be no way, and we were on a glaciated peak, so there's no way to really do that safely solo wise. So we would have to.
Mm,
So we started that particular climb by all tying a knot into our collective rope to signify that, yeah, we were definitely all in it together. And there were people at times that dug very deeply, um, to stay in and to stay in process, both in
wow.
general as the expedition went on and specifically on summit day. Two of the folks really dug deep. Summit day, because we were going back to an established camp, it might have been that they could have just turned with somebody else. So there is that complex psychology because you
Very complex.
you don't want someone, also to climb into the danger zone. You want to be able to have to push past the, like I said, climbing at altitude is no fun. It takes great mental strength. So I think sometimes it was actually Pema Chodron, who's a Western Buddhist nun who's written lots of accessible books for the Western mind about Tibetan Buddhism, who talked about the wisdom of no escape. And so when there is no escape, for me anyway, that sometimes makes it easier to hold my seat or to stay in.
I think
And
so, for sure.
because Everest again has different, it has the base camp, it has camp 1, camp 2, camp 3, camp 4. I mean, there would be places on the mountain that if you chose to or needed to turn, you might have to turn other folks to go with you to keep you safe,
I
things
see.
like that in descent. But basically, from camp 2 back down to base camp, independent travel is safe. It's because of the route that's set on the mountain with fixed lines, and as long as you're safely able to move yourself, you
Hmm.
could, with depending if you're climbing with a personal Sherpa or not, you could evacuate yourself. So
I, the moral of the story might be mountaineering much more of a team sport than I ever realized before I read your book or spoke to you here today. Let's get back on track with the training, ATA. So here's how I'd like you to frame this for us, okay?
okay.
You have now had 3 attempts at Everest. In all the wisdom and the experience that you have today, if you were to backtrack and say make up what would have been the ideal program leading up to an Everest attempt for me, rather than focus on singular Everest attempts you may have had, put them all together for us, Tia, and give us your best summary of what a specific program might look like for you getting ready to tackle Everest. And maybe we'll start simply with the time. So if you're summiting in April or May, how far back do you go in terms of time when you start a specified training program to tackle Everest?
So I think a very specific, focused 6-month program of intense training prior to the date, preceded by 6 months of generalized overall fitness and strength training, is probably what makes most sense. So
Okay,
that
so
you've
let's start with
done, yeah.
let's go. Talk about what that would look like. Let's go back to the beginning there, the first part of the program. So we're 12 months out.
So, yeah, so we're 12 months out. So we want to start building the core strength, mobility, and work capacity. So you're working on those three kind of elements. So you're ideally doing some of your work with your flexibility and your balance. That part of the kind of that angle, because mountaineering does require great balance. So it is something that I do intentionally. So yoga practice, standing on medicine balls, slack line, just working specifically on balance. And I was never born a flexible human. If you look at my, I
Join
was
the club,
six.
TA.
I was six in gym, and I found an old gymnastics report card from when I was six, and it gave me A's in every aspect of physicality except flexibility. So it actually was a great relief. I never lost it. I never had it. But there are still ways in which I can work with this lovely, tight, constrained body of mine. So I kind of put balance in the flexibility done through Pilates and done through kind of yoga supporting. Then there's I usually start with body weight only strength training to start, and then I'll move into the gym with more compound kinds of moves. At times, I worked with trainers who could push me to do different things or moves I didn't like. I had one particular trainer who I liked a lot, did a lot of really integrated strength training, um, in, rather than just the classic stuff that I had done. Everyone would know it. This. So he had me doing some whole body kind of stuff. And then at the 6 month mark, building on that strong base of already feeling pretty strong and working on aerobic fitness. So for me, that meant playing a lot of ice hockey because it's the funnest way to do aerobic training. And that gives me that
Here,
HIIT
here, here,
training,
here, here.
that interval stuff. That's really fun that way. But it was also paired with lots of steps, like going to step aerobics class back in the day, step aerobics class wearing a backpack with that's sort of getting into the more specific time. Initially just going to step class, and then entering into the work capacity specificity phase. Then everything was about, what do I have to do on the mountain? Well, I have to carry stuff up mountains. So how do you practice going up mountains? You do step ups. You go to step class, you go to Signal Hill, which is a big hill in St. John's that has, we call it the world's best Stairmaster because the view is amazing, and you gain about,
Again, here,
what is it?
here.
Yeah. So you're just doing a bunch of stairs. When I was in Edmonton as a high school student preparing, we would go to a high rise and climb the stairs, which is gut wrenchingly boring. But that's also good for the mental preparation piece. And
TA was
so
actually fairly famous, folks, for being seen walking up Signal Hill dragging tires behind her. That
so
was the thing
yes.
you did.
So, and that again came as a specific piece that came to me out of my preparation for a polar expedition and hauling a sled. But I saw that because it's hard to be a high altitude mountaineer training at sea level. So mountaineering requires you to push against gravity, carry weight against gravity, and it's fairly slow at altitude. You can't rush. You don't want to be breathless at altitude, so you have to be comfortable being, a tortoise. So how do you be a tortoise? You put your grandmother's spare tire on your attached to your backpack, and you haul it up Signal Hill. And people say lots of funny things like, "Where's the rest of the car?" and "Are you going to retire soon?" and "Do you want me to call you a tow truck?"
TA,
But
the wit of Newfoundlanders, by the way, it's just something.
so yes, that ended up being, and hey, my backside, my hamstrings, my glutes, my lower back were infinitely strengthened, as well as my mind was infinitely strengthened. You knew exactly about the coefficient of friction, because when it was a little bit snowy or icy, that tire was a little bit easier, and when the pavement was dry, it was noisy and a pain. But you had that, it gave that really specific piece of practicing going super slow. I also did lots of hiking, just moving over terrain.
Can I ask you, in terms of a time, I'd like to be specific here. This is the exercise physiology nerd in me thinking here. Uh, like any one of these given sessions, because you might get into this later, but so in an attempt to get up Everest, there could be occasions, and I don't know what was your longest consecutive streak personally of movement, shall we say, but I know people I've heard of just crazy things like you're going up the mountain for like 20 hours consecutively. So knowing that that might be the case of something you have to endure to try to get up Everest, any one of these sessions you're speaking of, like a going up Signal Hill or the hikes or whatever, can you give us, TA, some specifics about like what is the length of time a training session, an individual training session might look like, or would it vary? Just anything you might have to say would be
Mhm.
interesting.
So yeah, so it training length of things varied dramatically. I was working full time at this time, so there was typically two different kinds of training sessions before the day began, whether that was a run, whether that was strength training, whether that was yoga. So they kind of alternated an academic morning, an aerobic morning, and then a flexibility balance morning and an aerobic morning. So then I just remember that whole time as being, I changed my clothes about 17 times a day. And then I would go to work, and then there would be a session at lunch, and then there would be a hockey game at the end of the workday, and then depending what else. So I had to kind of blocks that way. And then, similar to building a marathon training program, there was always a long day, uh, either
Mm,
typically Sundays.
sure, that's
So I would
Marathon
take I
101.
would take I would take a rest day and then have a long day. And that long day, again, just like you would in any kind of marathon training, got built over time to get
Mm-hmm.
longer and longer. So before I went to Everest my second time, my long day was about 8 hours, and it involved hauling the tire up Signal Hill 10 times and then climbing Signal Hill 10 times. Um, and in those kind of days, I would do the downs half the time and then get someone to help me get down the hill because it's
Mm,
a 4K round trip. So by the end of that day, I'd covered some incredible amount of elevation gain and time on task. The other
mm,
thing that happens in mountaineering is you do it in the dark. And so some of my long marathon days also involved getting up at 11 o'clock at night and doing them in the dark through the night to practice
to stimulate what would
differences
happen, yeah,
on the mountain. And
because that would happen
so
on the mountain.
some of that was, plotting a long hike that had to be done in the dark under the light of your headlamp and stuff. So I'm a big believer in, kind of when we can on some of our training, make it as specific as you can to your own environment. If you lived in Colorado or Alberta or something, like, you could just go climb mountains. But when you live in
Mm-hmm.
Newfoundland at sea level, we had to be a little more creative.
Mm-hmm.
So it was blocks, and every fourth week was a drop week. I learned to do that after my first one because I think after my first one I was a bit overtrained. So I would put in a significantly reduced week every fourth or fifth, depending,
Wow.
so that it would definitely be maintenance. It wouldn't be totally drop off, but that made really big. That was really key to stay healthy, to keep training injuries at bay, and to kind of recharge, work on other tasks related to the expedition, and then have that real burst of energy. The other thing that I do in the year leading up is trying to um, optimize body weight slash mass for me for the mountain. Um, so I have actually at times, especially in my first one, um, I engaged with a dietitian who helped me work with my program because the goal was to drop fat, not muscle mass, and to you. But it's funny because you need to go to the mountain heavier than you need to be because you will ultimately
You're going to lose
always
weight.
you're going to lose weight. So you're trying
Yeah.
to find that sweet spot of making sure you're not carrying any extra, but you got to know kind of how much extra. Like some of the guys that I climbed with on my second expedition, um, they went up, well, I was up on the first one. We went up, and then they got turned back from Camp 4, and they just couldn't stomach coming all the way down to base camp, which probably didn't make sense. So they spent like another week and a half at Camp 2, and then they went up and summited, and then they ultimately came down. So they came down, like I called it, like chicken legs. They were like their muscle had just
Yeah.
disappeared, and
Amazing.
they didn't. It's hard to eat at altitude. It's very difficult, and so they just like shrank. And when I at Everest, there is the Himalayan Rescue Association maintains a medical facility to treat Sherpas and porter staff and tourists and climbers. And Luann Freer, who was the founder of that, an MD, used to say that if you lost more than 10% of your body weight, there would be little chance of you having enough strength to summit the mountain. So she
10%
was
is being the cutoff,
10%. And so she was
generally
always
speaking.
really pushing climbers that despite the loss of appetite, and you can lose your appetite even at base camp, let alone your next four your things up. And you have to sort of figure out, like, one hint I often, people will tell me I'm going to Machu Picchu or I'm going to Kilimanjaro, and they'll ask for hints. And I'll always say, take your second favorite snack. And they'll kind of look at me and turn their head a little bit. And I'll say, because altitude can put you off your favorite snack and you may never be able to eat it again. So don't
Wow.
take your favorite. Um, but, definitely take, because you hire an outfitting business that manages your base camp and manages your base camp food. A few people decide to try to go truly solo, but it's pretty rare. So they'll have, snacks that can be purchased depending if it's a UK outfitter, a US outfitter, or a Nepali outfitter. But they might not be the snacks you like, or, some
Mm.
of us have savory tastes, some of us have sweet tastes. So it's important. I always said when I packed my snacks for Antarctica, I learned that you don't know what you might go off of. So I took a variety I took little
Mm.
daily snack packs, and I made sure some of them were sour and some of them were sweet and some of them were salty, so that there was always something you could find palatable, because you're living in the cold, you're exerting a huge amount of physical effort every day. And if you stop being able to eat, and especially living in tight quarters like a place like Everest Base Camp, it's not that uncommon to get gastro. It's not that uncommon to pick up a respiratory virus. And so that ability to continue to care for yourself and to continue to eat um, is a skill. I mean, I had a friend who
For
came with us
sure.
on Kilimanjaro. I just remember she remembered me saying, he or she or they who eat the most get to the top. And she was staring down this boiled egg, and she was staring it down and staring it down, and she eventually choked it down. We still can just tease her by holding up a boiled egg. She's never been able to eat a boiled egg since she ate it that day and she got up. But
Good for her.
she's never been able to eat a boiled egg since.
Speaking of eating,
Hmm.
again, getting back to the training leading up the year before the attempt itself, would you go to the degree of like counting calories? Not everyone counts calories, I know, but it sounds interesting, given all the activity that you're doing. Um, any idea how many calories you're ingesting in the training, or if not an exact number, just some thoughts again about getting ready to go up. Some last comments about the eating component.
So yeah, when I was intentionally trying to drop a little bit of extra weight before stopping, a month or so out, my nutritional person did have me counting calories. I think mostly as an exercise in portion control, and actually did always appreciate the that time. It's a lot of work, so I've never really done it since. Once I sort of understood.
It is a lot of
Um,
work, yeah.
and I think since that time, when I first started climbing, there weren't smartphones yet. So now there's apps, and that would
Mm,
actually make that much easier. But definitely, mostly an emphasis on quality. Quality food. I was worried I wasn't eating enough protein. She actually showed me I wasn't eating enough carbs, those kinds of things. So it was really good to have someone in that was coaching me on that, because left to my own devices, I might not have set it up as well as, and I don't exactly remember the ratio that she set up, but, sort of since then, I've utilized a philosophy of, eating a nice diversity of foods as close to the ways in which they were grown. And
sounds sounds very sensible to me.
and has
Let me
worked
ask you,
well.
absolutely. Let me ask you one last thing about the training component. And I know you availed TA of a hypoxia mask that they had at MUN there. Again, we're getting into the component, the difficulties associated with trying to do anything at altitude. But talk about this hypoxia mask and how you use that in your training.
So yeah, I was lucky enough that one of my colleagues is a cardiorespiratory physiologist, so he had the go to altitude system, and essentially that system hypoxenates the air and has a big mylar bag that fills with hypoxenated air, so you can dial it up to a certain percentage of oxygen in the air. So he designed all of those programs for me. They typically involved interval training, so heavy activity and then a rest period, heavy activity and then a rest period, like, and it would build, 30 seconds, a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes through the session. And you're wearing an SpO2 meter to monitor your SpO2 level, saturated level of oxygen. And it was pretty amazing to sort of watch it happen. The interesting thing was, as I got fitter and fitter and closer to the mountain, I had to take the mask off during the rest intervals, even though ideally I would have done the rest phase on, because I would suck the mylar bag dry. The
Wow,
machine couldn't pump out enough um,
it's
into this
amazing.
into the bag. So I was like, in order to breathe, I actually would take it off. It would refill. I would do the next interval. So it ended up being, I would do the hypoxic work, and then it would be the rest interval would be on room air. And
Wow.
initially, we used a treadmill, and a treadmill on an angle, wearing a backpack. And then I think the second go around, we also used a bicycle as well. And he wanted me to use the bicycle to prepare because he wanted me to do some VO2 max testing as a way to just check on things. And I'll always remember, it was really, he he gave me a really nice psychological gift that I didn't realize till later, when I was getting ready to go to the second time. And I said, we did the VO2 max testing, and we all know how much fun that is. And I said, well, how are my numbers? And his reply was, you're ready to go to the mountain. I still
That's
to
that's
this
that's encouraging.
I still have no idea to this day what the numbers actually said,
Doesn't
and
matter.
I'll never know. But I thought it was brilliant, because I think, had he given me the actual numbers, it could have easily been a point for musing,
Yeah.
like, oh,
And
that's not as high as I thought it would be. That's not as high as I'd hoped it'd be. Or, wow, that's much higher than I expected it to be. And
so
just by
TA,
saying you're ready to go, it was good.
that's good. That's a beautiful segue here into how I was planning, believe it or not, to lead off part two. So we could talk for hours and hours about the training process of getting ready. Uh, but in the interest of time, let's jump forward and talk about some of your experiences on Mount Everest. And you just mentioned about uh, a certain VO2 max. And where I was going with that is I was going to lead off by asking you, TA. So again, now we're on Mount Everest or any of these other seven summits, any of the really super challenging mountains that human beings have tried to climb. I was going to ask you, TA, just quite openly, open-ended, what makes a great mountaineer? Like, say, like a Reinhold Messner, like the elite of the elite. I could give this kind of an answer with a sport you and I know about, hockey. If someone asked me to describe why Wayne Gretzky was so good at hockey, I'd give you a bunch of reasons. In that sport, not a lot of them have to do with pure physiology. There's some physiology at work in, I'm speaking of the sport of hockey. So, for example, just very baldly, I think 9% of the NHLTA are my height or shorter. So you might say there's a cutoff physiologically in terms of just height that is limiting. If you're not a certain height, it's going to limit you. Not make it impossible, but it's going to limit you. But that had nothing to do with why Wayne Gretzky was a great hockey player. So the question I was going to get you to provide some insight towards is what makes a great mountaineer? Is it a physical thing, or is it more of a mental thing? And if you could articulate in any way what makes a great mountaineer, that would be very interesting, I would think.
When you ask some of the long term folks that have guided others on Everest, they will kind of give you the 90-10 or the 85-15 or 80-20 split, with the 80-85-90 being mental and the 10-15-20% being physical.
So
And
again, like hockey, there is a physical. Like, you got to be in shape. But probably TA, there is. It probably wouldn't be accurate, or maybe it would be accurate. I don't know. Like, there might be a cutoff VO2 max that you might need to try to get up Everest, maybe. But probably, if I may guess, it wouldn't be a VO2 max that's so high that it's unattainable to a mere mortal. So you need to be fit.
you
But what
need to
you're
be,
saying is the overwhelming majority is mental.
yeah, it's hugely mental. And I think there is a cutoff should you wish to climb with a VO2 max cutoff if you wish to climb without supplemental oxygen. The
Oof.
people that actually can pull
Well, we're
off
talking about
climbing,
another breed of
yeah,
animals, and
that's a whole other kettle of fish. But yes, the mere mortal climber who prepares their particular container, their body as best they can, can, and they have a physiology that allows them to acclimatize, because there are some humans that can't acclimatize. There are people that are topped at about 3,500 to 4,000 meters, and no matter how slow they go, no matter what they do, they just can't pass that elevation. So
it's
those,
interesting.
they're in that bucket. And then there's the folks who can acclimatize and who generally do okay. Those folks, if they get themselves fit enough to be able to move, because there's also the concept of um, speed in mountaineering, or the ability to cross a part of the mountain in a time frame that makes
Mm,
sense. So
sure.
when you're moving at altitude, if you're less cardiovascularly fit, can you cross it? Yes, but it might take 12 hours or 16 hours versus, and we see that in the times going through the ice fall. So you're at base camp, and then you have to go through the Kumbu Icefall on the south side. The first time everybody goes through, Westerners are going to be between 6 and 9 hours, and then as people acclimatize, some Westerners could get it as low as 4 hours, 3 hours. The Sherpas, might start at 4 hours, and some of them by the end are going through it in 2 hours.
And is
Um,
that TA function more so of physiology or technical skill?
it's it's a combination, because that was always my strategy, thinking through. I'm a 5 foot 2 3/4 on a good day, and likely shrinking now human. So you can only stuff lungs that are a certain size in this body.
Mm,
So
mm.
once I get to a level of fitness that I can achieve through what I can when I'm full time, blah blah blah, what else can I do to make myself faster? Is those technical skills. So I had a ladder on the back porch that I practiced walking across with my crampons on, and that I practiced all the clipping moves. So it's like, yeah, you might beat me because you're 6 inches taller than me and male, but you know what? I can have my backpack packed faster. I can have my climbing
Mm,
harness done better, and I can do the knots faster and better because I spent hours doing that piece, which
mm.
can, it's kind of like again, those surrounding skills. So I would not necessarily try to make up for, but just again add that insurance that, yep, I'm going to be. I mean, there have been, like, on McKinley or Denali, people would be what we do in kicking steps, and then your initial two people are working really hard, and then you swap them out, and two other people go, and essentially so that you can all then just follow in the footsteps. Well, if there's a 6'2" guy going up first, like those of us that are dosh hounds have to call up and say, yeah, I know it's not your ideal thing, but for me to make that amount of a step means I'm going to tap out and you're going to lose me, because I'm having to make steps that are higher than my knees. So there are ways in which height, as it is in some activities, can be an advantage. On the other hand, when the wind is blowing and you're on a very narrow ridge, it's very handy to be lower to the ground and have that center of mass closer to the ground to not get blown off the side of the mountain. So there isn't an ideal body type, uh, but there is, typically, just like in cold water survival, there are ways in which women's physiology, we don't lose as much weight on the mountain. So that can be, in terms of the length of an expedition, But there is, you need to have that mental piece, and that mental piece is, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you've got a little bit of headache, can you manage the anxiety that, is this high altitude cerebral edema, or is this just an altitude headache? Oh, I just heard something rumble about me. Is that going to be an avalanche? Can I do that? During my first expedition, this person who was a realtor from like Aspen or something, was climbing with Dave Hahn, the best, guide, and paid, like, at that point, way back in 2007, $125,000 for the privilege. And I think probably made a few little calculated errors in terms of, or uncalculated errors, and that his fiancee came up to the mountain with him and they got married at base camp.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so had this big life event, and then he made one lap on the mountain and decided to call it. And I was sort of like, wow, that's that must be a tough call. He's like, well,
Wow.
it's just commission on one house sale. Whereas
Oh my goodness.
I'd mortgaged my house. I'd spent all this time, so those are those pieces. There's also folks that, we had one guy on a climb where we were worried his life outside of mountain was in shambles, and there was a concern that he was trying to do suicide by mountain. And he went up and had a high altitude cerebral edema experience, so he didn't remember how bad he was, and they almost had to restrain him to keep him from going back up again. So there's
Oh
very
my
intense
goodness.
group dynamics. We had the first Finnish woman on our team to try to get up, competing against another Finnish woman in another camp, and the dynamics and the social media posting back and forth. And so there's this huge psychological, it can be, dynamics going on between camps. And then there's you managing your own self, and you feel nauseated and headachy. And so there's that's the whole mental piece of managing
Hmm.
the acute mountain sickness that comes with acclimatization in an atmosphere of, in some cases, can be highly competitive. We were timed on one of my expeditions on how fast we went through the ice fall, which didn't make a lot of sense. So there's a lot of ways, but it's hugely mental.
Let's
But you need the base of the physiological as well.
so let's talk about your experiences, both mental and physical. And again, I'm going to reference your book here, T.A. So the first time that you tried to get up the mountain, it seems to me that the reason why it didn't, and by the way, because I recommend buy this book again, folks. Um, it seems to me the reason why you failed to summit the first time was basically you got sick, T.A. You were physically unwell, and that may have been due to your. This is my registered dietitian professional expertise here. Your lack of ability to eat a damn thing. When I read this book, it seems like you're throwing up constantly. I want to read again. This is another quote directly out of T.A.'s book. On just shortly before she pulled the plug on the first attempt on Mount Everest. Here we go. On my hike out to the ridge, I could feel the lifeblood energy bleeding out once again. So I choked down half a Cliff Bar. It was hard not to get discouraged as I pulled each step out of the depths of my starving body. I gagged frequently on my walk, and it felt like my esophagus was being turned inside out with each episode. I kept puzzling over what was going on in my body. I'm usually such a good eater. I have never had such prolonged nausea. What is happening to me? And I guess, Dave, what was happening to you is this is life at altitude, and that seems to be to me, again, in my humble diagnosis there, the reason why attempt one didn't succeed. Can you elaborate on some of the kind of things you were feeling, at least on this first attempt on Everest?
Well, and with the first one too, uh, I had come down with a respiratory illness, Kumbu cough, etc., which happens to probably 75% of folks that get up. So you're coughing hard and different things. And in order to get better from that, sometimes they tell you to go down to green. So you go down to where the air is a bit thicker, so you can just get rid of it, so that you don't have to keep trying to breathe through whatever respiratory thing you picked up. And unbeknownst to all of us, when I went down, you stay at tea houses. You've left the kind of sanctity of your expedition team. And I picked up giardia from some contaminated water, but that wasn't recognized. People just kept thinking it was nausea from uh, the altitude. So that what was also causing my GI stuff. It was kind of like high altitude gut stuff on max. So yeah, there was a lot going on. I was trying to sort through it. It is hard to sort out. I mean, basically, I think at altitude, the assumption is it's altitude related until proven otherwise. So we didn't really
Hmm.
think that early enough. And by the time we figured it out and started treatment, which is also just nasty, it's like eating tin cans. The medication that you have to use, I was like, if I could show you a picture, my pants, stuck out, like I had to tie them up. I was too thin. I'd lost the 10%, and
Plus more, I think.
yeah, so
You said like
it
15%, I think you said here in the book.
yeah, so it was like recognizing that, yes, could I keep pushing to the depths of my being? But I also had spoken to like 60,000 kids before I went, and I wasn't willing to I didn't want to traumatize a whole generation,
Oh
again,
my
with
goodness.
something that I had control over. And I recognized that though I desperately wanted to, I was going to be, I was already moving so slowly below base camp that the reality of being able to get fat enough to get strong enough in the shrinking window wasn't there. So
Hmm.
yeah, I made a very hard decision. It was extremely disappointing, um, and learned a lot from it. That's when I, realized that I probably did a bit too much outreach, and I think I was overtrained. When I went to my second expedition, I think I hit the sweet spot. I was perfectly trained, and unfortunately, still
Now,
got
was the
taken out.
second one,
Second
T.A.,
one
which
was,
was the one? At one of these attempts, you made it four-fifths of the way up there.
yeah. So in both
Which
of
was that?
my second one was my absolute highest because I climbed up to 7,300 meters or so. That's above Camp 3.
7,300. Wow.
Um, and then in my fourth or my third one, got to Camp 3. And the unfortunate
And
part about
how high
my
up is Camp 3?
Camp 3 is just past 7. Well, Camp
Just
3
past
is, it
7.
depends on where your Sherpas put it. It's on the Lhotse face, so they have to literally carve out platforms, and it's a pretty airy location. So
Hmm.
in my what ended up happening in my second one again was just an interesting house of cards that got stacked up. We went up, we climbed to Camp 1, we climbed to Camp 2, we we went up and tagged 3. We made a day visit to 3, and we came back down. And I had a group of friends coming up from the bottom, so we'd had this plan that I would go down and have a big rest period before summit bid. And so been up high for 7 days. Came down to base camp, hiked down 2 days. Or I did it in one day, but 2 days worth of walking to come back up. Got there. My team was one day away. I was getting ready to, eat, feast, eat yummy things, sleep much better than you've been sleeping. And I get a satellite phone call from our team leader saying, "Get back up here. We're going on the summit bid." And it was
Wow.
ridiculous. So I did what I was told. I been up 7 days, came back, climbed up 2 more days, packed my bags. The next morning, I dragged my ass back up to Camp 1, and I dragged my ass back up to Camp 2. And when I got to Camp 2 after 10 days of climbing in a row, I just hit a wall. And
Hmm.
again, just to quickly illustrate how cognitively challenged you can be when you are hypoxic, the team was getting ready to move to Camp 3. We only have one sleeping bag. You carry it with you. And I had some thought that maybe I could get to 3, but I was on fumes because we didn't get a rest period before we were started. So I was trying to figure out how I could, and the Sherpas had said, we'll carry your sleeping bags up for you, which was an amazing offer to the four of us on that summit wave. But I'm like, well, if my bag goes to Camp 3, I won't have any choices. So in
Hmm.
the end,
Hmm.
the elegant solution, because I was climbing with a man named Angel who was going to for sure get to Camp 3, is Angel should have sent his sleeping bag up. He was one of the assistant guides. He should have sent his sleeping bag up, carried mine, and we climbed together. And if I say, I'm done, give me my sleeping bag, I can carry it downhill. But neither of us could figure it out. And we didn't make, one of the big lessons was, oh,
So interesting.
we should have called base camp to say, help us figure this out. So I made the decision at that point that, okay,
But it
I'm
just
just,
never occurred to you because of the conditions you're in.
right.
No oxygen. You've been working at an incredible capacity for days on end. You said, oh,
So it was 9 days. It was essentially
yeah.
9 days straight. Long story short, I said the next day, it's like, I'm tired. And I probably should have just stayed at Camp 2 and tried to recover. But we thought that was it. That was the summit bid. So if you didn't go on it, you're done. Well, these were the guys who went up. They went up to Camp 4, tried, it didn't happen. And came back and they stayed at 2 for like another week. So again, they were like strung out bad. I thought we were done. I carried all my shit off the mountain. Had I known there was a second bid, I just would have rested low. And
Mm.
that was, some poor leadership that on that particular thing of saying that this was the only bid. So I got stuck with some
Mm.
poor leadership on that one. Cause again, I
That's
was
too
doing
bad.
fine, but what asked to go 12, 15 days in a row, that was absurd for everybody. So that
How
was
many
bad.
hours a day are we talking of the 15
But
days in a row?
at least 5 and sometimes as many as 9.
Yeah.
So that's what caused, number 2. Cause I think for number 2, I did a nice big long trek in. I was well acclimatized. I didn't do too much training beforehand, but then got, hoodwinked by that particular dynamic. And so these,
And let me, I might add something in here, T A, because we're gonna build to a conclusion here in a second. And I don't know what happens on the third attempt, but so far, attempt one, we're going to attribute to microorganisms. Number two, leadership decisions, we'll call it. I might suggest, TA, and I'm not taking you off the hook, but neither of those really you have any control over personally. I don't think too
no,
much of.
yeah.
So with that being said, I'm eager to find out. Let's talk about the third and your final attempt. What year is this, by the way, TA?
So third one was 2016. And
And your
again,
first was in 2007. So you've got a 9-year
2007.
window where
Yeah.
you make 3 attempts at Everest.
And
Well, we could get
2016.
into, by the way, there's a whole other psychology at work, how you go up this friggin' mountain and you experience the kind of misery you experience. Then you come back and you say, yeah, I'm going to give that another try.
Well, and
And then you do it a third time. But anyway, we don't have time for all that.
I
But
always
so
had a
you were
friend
going
that
to say?
I had a friend who always said you had to do anything tough twice because you know how hard it is the second time. So, I
Okay, so
jumped out of an
we're on
airplane.
to the.
We're on to it gets harder and harder. There was a 3 year interval. Then it took me 6 years to decide again. Again,
Now we're on to the third time.
tried to put all the lessons in place. And again, um, we had some, a couple of things happen. Like our head guide expedition leader had a sprained ankle in the ice fall on one of our attempts that we had to turn around because there was a little micro avalanche. And then we went up, and because again, the window can get shrunk depending on how long it takes to get the route up and things. So anyway, we went to Camp 1. We went to Camp 2. We went and slept at Camp 3. So now we're technically ready to go to the summit bid once we come down and rest. But I started to falter a little bit on the way down because I'd been fighting a gall darn cough. If I can figure out how not to get the Kumbu cough, life will be great. So I was coughing, 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 coughing. So I hadn't been sleeping, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, on the way down, we got to the ice fall, and I was moving pretty slow. And out of a concern for my teammates, I wondered if I could get a little helicopter hop through the ice fall so they wouldn't have to go as slowly because it's an area of intense danger. And because I was coughing so much, it was hard to speak. I would speak and cough and speak and cough. And I allowed someone else to make the radio call, so I couldn't explain it. And as it turns out, either I was looking or appearing much more poorly than I was in my own. I was doing this out of a concern for teammates, not a concern for how poorly I felt. But essentially, some of the wires got crossed. And so through the jigs and the reels, as we say, I ended up in Kathmandu that night.
Wow.
um, so that whole attempt was kind of funny in that it felt like you, sometimes you take off from St. John's Airport on an airplane, and then you get almost to Halifax, but you can't land, so you have to come back and land back in St. John's. And it was kind of like, did an expedition just
It's
happen?
happened to me.
And so, um,
Amazing.
in that fall, I was doing my WIFR research, and I'm actually on a episode of Everest Rescue, and you can see me in the aircraft, and you can see me talking to the pilot, and it was obvious that I was not in that much distress. And there was a dentist on the expedition. He put my vital signs on my phone. So long story short, again, at that fall, I was redoing my wilderness first responder, and I was talking to this medic who'd been a mountaineering medic, and I told her the situation. She looked at it. She said, "You didn't need to go to Kathmandu. You likely had walking pneumonia. You may still not have the end game may still not have been the same,
Hmm.
but I may have been able to evacuate myself. I may not have needed to take a
Wow.
helicopter all the way to Kathmandu." And the funny thing is, I ended up getting land sickness from the helicopter flight. So I had to deal
Oh
with
my goodness.
vertigo for about 3 weeks. I had never heard of land sickness. But anyway, so I'm not too fond for 2016, only in that it had an ending that was entirely, again, as you would point out of my control. But I learned many things um,
100%.
about communication. Even though
And
communication was difficult, I probably should have written what I wanted them to say. So every time you go, even if you don't, as I like to say, sometimes you don't get to climb as high as you want, but you learn so many incredible things that you can take with you into whatever the next thing might be.
well, TA, that is a wonderful sentiment to finish up there. It's just I could talk to you for hours and hours, but that's a great lesson to end on. But before we end conclusively here, we can learn if you have just another 10 minutes, TA. We have some more things we can learn from you. If you have 10 minutes,
Yep.
okay, and we'll do it in the form of the way in which I end all these interviews. 10 questions, TA.
Okay.
So here's how this works. I'm just going to give you 10 questions. You give us whatever thought you might have. It could be a short answer, it could be in a funny story, whatever you think. But we can still learn some things here, folks, from T A Loeffler if we play 10 questions. So let's begin. Let's start the game here. 10 questions to conclude our conversation here. And T A, I'm looking at my screen here. Question number one. Now I put you on the spot, TA, at the beginning, and I asked you a heavily philosophical question about why mountain climbing. I'm going to put you in an even more difficult spot here with this question. Why Buddhism?
Because I needed at the time to learn a lot about working with my mind, and I had to make friends with my mind. And through that process of learning Buddhist philosophy and by practicing meditation and mindfulness, I became much more comfortable with my mind, and that proved absolutely invaluable to all of these adventures.
There you go. And TA, I don't know too much about Buddhism, but I read a book recently, just before I read your book, actually. It was the predecessor of this one, How to Live a Good Life is the name of this book. And what it does, TA, it goes through basically all the different world religions, but it's more than just religions, religion slash philosophies about living life. Anyway, and it gives a snapshot. Buddhism is in there. So I learned at least an introductory course on Buddhism can be found in this book, How to Live a Good Life, and it compares and contrasts all the different world philosophies. So anyway, that's my expertise, TA, on Buddhism. You could have another hour and a half about Buddhism, I think. But we don't have time. We've got to fly through here. Let's shift gears only slightly, TA. Only slightly. Question number two. What is the best type of donut from Tim Hortons?
Oh, absolutely, vanilla dip. And I think vanilla dip is a quick metaphor for how I see life. You have the cakey, if you get a fresh one, the cakey soft under bit, which is kind of like our soft gooey insides, our emotional life. Then you have the almost sickly sweet icing, which is kind of like those high moments. and then you have the crunchy little sprinkles that have the multicolors to remind us about the different energies, the Buddhist energies, the prayer flags, but also that crunch, like sometimes life is sort of crunchy. And then you pair that with a large tea with milk. So you've got the bitter, and you go back and forth between the bitter and the sweet, and the bitter, the sweet, and it sums up life philosophy.
TA, I feel like I need to give a disclosure because that answer was too profound. People are going to say, "Why did I knew that you liked the vanilla dip? The vanilla dip was kind of like a trademark thing for you, at least during the initial Everest attempt." So I did know that, and hence why she, as I knew she would, this analogy for life, folks, in a Tim Hortons donut. I told you we could keep learning from TA here, just in this 10 questions game. All right, TA, that was my nutritional question. Let's do a few more about mountaineering, shall we? I got four pieces of equipment, four things that are relevant in the world of mountaineering. You can just give us a brief explanation of what they are. Can you explain to us what is a? I'm not even sure if I can pronounce this right. Carabiner?
The British say carabiner, and we say carabiner. Basically,
Carabiner. Okay,
it's
so what is
a
that?
it's a little link made out of aluminum. Typically, people might have them see them on their keys, but they allow us to clip into the rope and clip into anchor points. So they're kind of like a quick little hasp kind of a thing that we can use to clip onto mountains.
There you go. Question number 4, another mountaineering question. Can you explain for us what is a crampon?
A crampon. When I talk to grade 4 classes, I call them foot fangs or teeth for your feet. So they are about the length of 2 digits of your finger. They point. There's 10 spikes that point down and two spikes that point out in front, and they enable you to keep a good grip on icy surfaces. The two fangs in front allow you to climb vertically over ice, and they make you walk as if you're Frankenstein because you don't want to catch your pant legs, which can cause a tumbling fall. And they're fabulous to get through icy terrain.
Question number 5. Can you explain what is an ice axe?
An ice axe is kind of like a cane that we use. It has a pointy little end on the end of the shaft, and then it has an adze end or a flat end that looks kind of like this, and then a pick on the other end. We can use it to chop steps or platforms to sit or stand on. The pick end allows us to go vertically up over things, and it's an essential tool when we're traveling on a rope team all connected together. Should someone fall in an opening, we can fall down, and that pick helps us from sliding, or if we fall on the mountain, we have a whole set of rolling techniques to get that pick into the mountain.
Wow. I can only imagine. Wow. Okay, question number 6. Last one about mountaineering. Can you explain what is a ladder crossing?
So, especially on Everest and a few other Himalayan peaks, you get these large openings in the glacier or the icefall called a crevasse. It's a French word, it just means an opening. If you bend a chocolate bar, you know how it opens those gaps? That's what happens as glaciers move over, they open these things. So, to make it really efficient to go across them, they will lash ladders together. So, they're just aluminum construction ladders. They put in 2 safety ropes, and you walk across them to get to the other side rather than having to rappel down, go across, and climb back up. Saves a lot of energy and time.
Looks pretty gnarly though. Looks pretty scary.
It
To
is
me
it
anyway.
For many folks. It is very. It is scary. You're looking at the grand abyss. If you fall off, you hope the safety lines hold. And some people will butt scoot, some people will crawl, and some Sherpas are so confident they just walk across them. But that
They just
sometimes
walk right across these.
it's not a
Wow,
great
amazing.
idea.
Okay, we're flying through. Question number 7, TA. As you know, I'm also very proudly, by the way, born and raised in Newfoundland. Newfoundland is known for its unique dialect. Now, you've been there a long time, so you can answer this question, I think. TA, what is the best Newfoundland expression?
My favorite is "Where's you to?" and kind of
Which means basically,
what are you
which means,
at?
yeah.
How are
Tell me your
you?
present location. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
"Where's you to?" can be definitely what's your present location, and "what are you at?" is kind of like how are you?
What? Yeah. It's a greeting. Yeah. How you doing?
How you doing?
Anyway.
What are you at? Where's you to?
All right. Question number 8. This TA is the one question every single person gets asked. You are no exception. So you will now tell us, TA, what is your all-time personal best one rep max bench press?
Ooh, it's been a while since I've done that. So it was probably I'm trying to I'm picturing my training log. 120, I think, something like that.
One rep max bench pressing probably is of, I'll say, minimal utility to climbing up Mount Everest in the grand scheme of activities you might do to climb Mount Everest.
Yeah.
Doing TA. All right. We only have two left. TA, I know that you and I, we share a love of the sport of hockey. Can you very, very quickly give us your best story of refereeing, because I'm a referee too, by the way, refereeing hockey?
Well, you asked me to talk about Newfoundland vernacular. One of my favorite moments, which was kind of entertaining, I was reffing the championship game of this big tournament that we have in the stadium, Mile One Stadium, where our junior and Quebec Major League play. And the coach goes, "Ref, darling, come on over here." And both totally offensive and totally
Oh
like
my
actually
God.
a term of endearment. And I kind of had to negotiate that in my mind as I skated over. And I said, "I'm here. What's your question? And by the way, just call me ref from now on."
That is a good one. That is a good story. Yeah. I don't think he would have used that term if you were a male referee, TA.
He never would have.
Oh
Um,
my God Almighty. Okay, so TA, for our 10th and final question, what I would like to do, I think the best way to close out this wonderful discussion that we've had here this morning, I'm going to, for one last time, I'm going to go back to your book, TA, which I can plug one last time. Here we go. I suggest everyone get this book and read it. And I'm also, TA, I'm going to go back to my days as an English student. And one of the things we had to do in English was analyze themes in literature. So what I'm going to do for the 10th question is going to be just to get your comment on my what I took to be the theme of the book, which would be something like this, TA. And I think it's a good analogy, maybe, that it's not just this book about climbing mountains, but maybe for life in general. And that theme would be something along these lines. It cannot be simply about reaching the summit. Because what I learned about mountain climbing from this book and speaking to you here this morning, there's so many factors to it that you really have very little control over. And the mountain is so uh, monumental in comparison to us measly human beings. Um, it cannot just be about the summit. It's got to be about the process as well. That was my interpretation, but I leave it up to you to critique, add, subtract anything from what I just said about the 10th and final question. What's the main theme of all of this, T.A. Loeffler?
I think you did a lovely summary. Thanks for reflecting that back to me. And I think that was my big learning. I always go back to Lance Armstrong's book title anyway. It's like it's not about the
Not
bike,
about the bike.
and so here in some ways it's not about the mountain. It is about the mountain, but it's not about the mountain. And uh, given, like you said, there's so many factors. There's so many cards you're stacking up, and sometimes they all come together: the weather, your teammates, your health, your mental attitude, your nutrition, your ability to stay clear of illnesses, and it all comes together and you stand on top, and that's amazing and lovely and a fantastic experience. And then other times one of those little house of cards gets pulled out, your teammate gets sick, your the political climate of a country, you can't get a permit, uh, something tragic happens on the mountain, you just don't have it on that particular summit bid. So if we can, when we're taking on any big project, whether that's writing your first novel or whether that's studying for a degree, if we can take the learnings from every step along the way, then it's much richer than thinking it's either a one or a zero. It's either summit or not. And in fact, it's this lovely series of ones and zeros. And if we can take the learnings from every step, then we're all the more richer. And it doesn't have to be success or failure. It has to be about enriching our lives and trying to be the best humans we can be.
The process is the success, maybe, TA.
Indeed, it's choosing the path, accepting the invitation, being willing even to go down the path. Because a lot of folks these days I meet don't want to do something unless success is guaranteed, and it isn't ever.
Again, TA, what can I say? Simply fantastic wisdom that you've shared with us here this morning. And from the bottom of my heart, TA, I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
My pleasure.
And as I always say in signing off, let's go Canada. Support Canadian athletes.